In the quiet hours before dawn, when the air is heavy with silence and dust, a small boarding school in northeastern Nigeria becomes the stage for a night that changed everything. A dormitory full of teenage girls lies still, their laughter from the day before has faded into sleep. Then out of the darkness comes the sound of engines, the thud of boots, doors crashing open. Shouts fill the air as masked figures move through the halls, calling to one another and forcing students outside. Within minutes, more than 200 children are gone. The smell of smoke mixes with the cries of those left behind. That single act would come to define the name Boko Haram for much of the world, a name spoken with fear and disbelief, translated to mean Western education is forbidden. Yet long before that event shocked the globe, this story had already begun. It began years earlier in the dusty city of Maiduguri with a preacher whose words would change the course of a nation. In 2002, the streets of Maiduguri pulsed with restlessness. Markets overflowed with traders selling yams cloth and cheap electronics. But beyond the color and noise was despair. Young men lingered, without work, many unable to finish school. The promises of government development fell far away. It was in this space between faith and frustration that a man named Mohammed Yusuf found his voice. Yusuf was born around 1970 in the small village of Gurgi in what is now Yobe State. He studied religion and became known for his passionate talks. By the late 1990s, he was preaching in Maiduguri, drawing hundreds to hear him. To his followers, he was more than a teacher, he was a visionary. He spoke of moral renewal and justice, of a return to spiritual discipline. But his message carried an edge. He claimed Western-style schooling had corrupted the nation and that Nigeria's leaders had abandoned faith for personal gain. For many in Borno State, Yusuf's words resonated. Decades of neglect had left the Northeast among the poorest parts of the country. Schools were few, hospitals understaffed, jobs scarce. The gap between elites in the capital and ordinary citizens widened each year. When Yusuf said the system was beyond repair, people listened. When he called for a new way of life built on integrity and accountability, they believed. He opened a mosque and learning center in Maiduguri where he taught his ideas. His talk spread through recordings and word of mouth. Those who joined him began calling their group the people committed to the propagation of the Prophet's teachings. To most Nigerians, they became known simply as Boko Haram. At first, the movement appeared peaceful, a religious reform effort focused on study and community service. Yusuf urged followers to live modestly and reject corruption. But as his popularity grew, so did his influence among the youth. Many were unemployed graduates, drivers, or street sellers who felt invisible in their own country. Yusuf gave them purpose and belonging. In the beginning, violence was avoided, but clashes with local police and rival clerics became more frequent, and rumors spread that his followers were gathering weapons. By 2009, tension reached a breaking point. A confrontation in the city of Bachi set off a chain of conflicts across several states. Boko Haram members attacked police outposts, and the government responded with overwhelming force. Security operations swept through neighborhoods, and for several days the city of Maiduguri echoed with chaos. When it ended, hundreds of people had lost their lives. Mohammed Yusuf was taken into custody and later died under disputed circumstances. Images of his body circulated meant to show victory, but his death did not end the movement, it transformed it. What had been a radical religious sect became a hardened insurgency. In the aftermath, surviving members went underground. Some crossed into neighboring countries, others hid in the forest surrounding Maiduguri. Among them was Yusuf's close associate, Abubakar Shekau. Shekau was different from his mentor. If Yusuf was the thinker, Shekau was the fighter. Where Yusuf spoke of renewal, Shekau called for revenge. He told followers that the blood of their leader demanded justice, and that the only answer was armed resistance. Under his direction, Boko Haram re-emerged with a new purpose. In 2010, they launched coordinated attacks on prisons, releasing inmates. Government buildings and churches were targeted. The violence spread quickly through the Northeast. In 2011, the group struck at an international symbol the United Nations building in Abuja. A vehicle packed with explosives drove into the compound, ending many lives and injuring scores. It was the group's first major action outside its home region, and it stunned the world. From that moment, Boko Haram became known for extreme tactics. Explosions, raids on villages, and assaults on public places spread fear throughout Nigeria. The government launched military operations to counter the threat, but civilians were often caught in the middle. Reports surfaced of excessive force from both sides. For many families, safety seemed to vanish overnight. By 2013, the government declared a state of emergency across Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa. Troops poured in. Checkpoints appeared on roads. Yet the more the army pressed, the more Boko Haram adapted, slipping into rural areas to strike and disappear. Then in April 2014 came the event that brought the group to global attention, the night raid on the government girls' secondary school in Chibok. The attackers overpowered guards, set parts of the school on fire, and forced 276 students into trucks. When news broke, outrage swept the world. The campaign to bring back our girls spread across social media, reaching every continent. World leaders promised assistance, but years later, many of the girls remained missing. For Boko Haram, the attack was both message and method. The group's name had always condemned Western education, and now that belief was expressed through violence against schools. By targeting students, especially girls, they struck at the heart of progress. To them, classrooms represented a foreign system. Destroying them was an act of defiance. Across the Northeast, schools were abandoned. Teachers fled. Parents kept children home, terrified of another raid. Villages that once echoed with morning lessons fell silent. Aid organizations later described a lost generation of children growing up without education. As the movement gained notoriety, its ambitions expanded. By 2014, Boko Haram began taking control of towns and villages, raising its own flags over government offices. In a video message, Shekau claimed to have established a new state within Nigeria. Early in 2015, reports emerged from the town of Baga near Lake Chad. Witnesses spoke of widespread destruction and large numbers of civilians harmed. Humanitarian groups estimated severe losses, making it one of the worst incidents of the conflict. At its peak, Boko Haram held territory roughly the size of Belgium. They imposed their own rules, collected taxes, and governed through fear. Citizens were compelled to follow strict codes, and those who resisted faced punishment. The Nigerian military, stretched thin and poorly equipped, struggled to respond effectively. Soldiers complained of shortages of supplies and intelligence. Some units withdrew rather than face an enemy they could not match. The government of the time faced harsh criticism for its handling of the crisis. By 2015, Nigeria sought help from its neighbors. Chad, Niger, and Cameroon formed a regional alliance, the Multinational Joint Task Force, to coordinate operations. With their assistance, Nigerian forces began reclaiming lost towns. Boko Haram fighters retreated into forests and across borders. Even as territory was recaptured, the violence changed shape. The group resorted to smaller but deadlier attacks, ambushes, abductions, and suicide missions carried out by individuals forced or deceived into doing so. Public markets, bus stations, and houses of worship became frequent targets. Shekau's faction grew increasingly unpredictable. His speeches, often released in online videos, were filled with threats toward the government and the West. Yet within Nigeria, his grip on the movement weakened. In 2015, he pledged loyalty to the leader of the group, known as Islamic State, renaming his faction the Islamic State in West Africa Province. The alliance created divisions within Boko Haram. Some commanders rejected Shekau's erratic leadership and his harsh treatment of civilians. In 2016, the group formally split into two factions: Shekau's loyalists and a new branch led by Abu Musab al-Barnawi, one of Yusuf's sons. For ordinary people, the split changed little. Fighting continued both between the two factions and against the army. Villages trapped between opposing sides were destroyed. Families fled again and again, carrying whatever they could on their backs. Humanitarian agencies recorded millions of displaced persons across Nigeria and neighboring countries. Camps sprang up around Maiduguri and beyond. Food shortages, disease, and trauma became daily realities. Children grew up knowing little but conflict. As global media attention moved elsewhere, the suffering continued largely unseen. Yet the war's consequences reshaped an entire region. Trade collapsed, farming declined. Fishing on Lake Chad, once the lifeblood of local economies, became impossible. Borders hardened and trust among communities eroded. Still amid the devastation, stories of courage emerged. Civilians organized local defense groups, known as the Civilian Joint Task Force. Young men, armed only with hunting rifles and determination, stood guard at night to protect their neighborhoods. They patrolled roads, guided soldiers, and rescued captives. Many lost their lives doing so, but their bravery gave their communities a fragile sense of hope. By the mid-2010s, Boko Haram had evolved from a national crisis into a regional insurgency with global implications. It had proven that neglect, poverty, and ideology could combine into a force capable of shaking nations. The battle was far from over. In the next phase, the years that would reshape not only Nigeria's northeast, but the entire Lake Chad region was only beginning.
Like, subscribe, and share True Crime with Chris, your weekly deep dive into real true crime and unsolved mysteries. Stay curious, stay safe, and remember, every story deserves to be told.